Hi, everyone. Welcome. We hope that everyone is doing well. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please feel free to share, if you haven't already, where you're joining us from around the world. And then also, what is one fun thing that you all did this summer? I would love to get to know more about you all. I see Reno, Nevada in the house. That's amazing. Ooh, the Redwood Forest. I love that. Oh, I see a maker's market for homeschool friends. That's awesome. Floating, fishing, hiking. I love this. Thank you all so much for sharing where you're coming from. And we are all over the place. My name is LaCara Simmons, and I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I work on the Amaze project as well. So I'm so thrilled for you all to be here. So I want to share with you all a little bit more about Amaze, just in case this is your first time being introduced to Amaze. So Amaze is a project under Advocates for Youth, and it's a digital media platform that provides young people around the globe with medically accurate, age-appropriate, affirming, and honest sex education they can get directly online. So it's regardless of where they live and where they go to school. So here at Amaze, we strive to assist you all as adults, just like yourself, to communicate more effectively and honestly with the young people in your lives about sex and sexuality. So tonight, we're excited to bring you all this information regarding how you can incorporate inclusive health education into your existing homeschool curriculum. So recently, we've received a lot of requests from homeschool educators wanting to utilize Amaze information within their curriculum. And so that's why we found the need to bring you a wonderful friend of Amaze, Andrea, who I'll introduce in a moment, and then also how you all could use this information in your existing health education curriculum. So a few housekeeping things that we have for you today. We want you all to connect and utilize the chat. So if you haven't already, change your to make sure that the chat box says everyone. And that way everyone can be involved in the conversation and really get to dialogue and connect with one another. If there's something that you want to just share with Andrea and I, you can go ahead and change that too from everyone to just the host and the panelists, and we'll be able to direct you and answer your questions privately. We do have closed captions available for tonight as well. So if you are on the full screen mode on Zoom, you can go ahead and click on that CC, which stands for closed caption. Or if you're in a smaller, more minimized screen, there's going to be 3 dots that you can go ahead and click for more. And then you can go ahead and pull up the closed captioning there as well. So finally, we want to also thank you all for those who provided questions before tonight's webinar during your Zoom registration. These were amazing questions. Most of the questions are going to be answered throughout the presentation tonight. There's other questions that we will go ahead and make sure that we do answer live. So your engagement is really important to us. So please feel free, if you have more questions throughout our presentation and our time together today, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can go ahead and utilize the Q&A button, and that is also going to be on the lower half of your screen. And we also have one more thing that I want to share with you. So in the email that we provided for you all, you did receive a nice, fun note catcher. So I'm going to put that note catcher in the chat for you all today, just for you to pull it up, jot some notes down, pull up that PDF. That way you can jot down any notes and questions and information that you receive tonight from us. So without further ado, it is my honor to present tonight's speaker and a dear friend of Amaze, Andrea Smith. So a little bit about Andrea. Andrea is a secular homeschool mom of 2 with a knack for being relatable and a passion for being inclusive. So before homeschooling, she was a public school health teacher and a community education specialist with a focus on comprehensive sex education for young people. When she's not making people laugh, among other things, on her social media platform at The Humorous Homeschooler, you can find her drowning in a pile of laundry, adding books to her collection that she's probably not going to read, but also spending time with her partner and husband, Chris, and her kids and 2 dogs in Chesapeake Bay. So without further ado, welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, LaCara. I am so happy to be here, and I can't believe that all of our months and months of planning and work that we all put into this, it's finally here. I've been just kind of looking at the chat box a little bit, and I see a few familiar names, so that makes me feel a lot more comfortable to see some familiar faces here, even though I can't actually see you. And it looks like a lot of people went camping this summer, which is always nice. We did not do anything really sort of outrageous this summer. This was our chill summer. We didn't do any traveling. The one thing we did do was go visit my friend Amber, which she's here actually. She's part of she said she did the Makers Market. So we did go visit them in Pennsylvania. And the kids love going up there because they have this huge castle playground. And so that was probably the highlight of our summer, and that was back in June. So I am so happy to be here. And I just want to start off by saying, this is what I want you to remember throughout this entire presentation here, is that you know your child best. You are the number one person who knows what they're ready for, knows what they can handle, how they learn best. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. Also, we know that homeschooling is on the rise, right? And with families no longer having access to comprehensive sex education for their young people, we really, really wanted to bring this to you all because there's a major gap where there is not a lot of inclusive, comprehensive sex education out there. So you'll notice that throughout this presentation, I'm also going to be saying your child, your kid, young learner, or just learner. And the reason for that is because we know not all homeschoolers, although many homeschoolers, the primary homeschooler is a parent, that's not always the case. So I might say learner interchangeably with child. So just apply whichever word works best for you and your family. So let's move on to the next slide. And I just want to briefly go over sort of my background here. I am a Midwest girl. I'm from Michigan, so that's where my education was at. I went to Grand Valley State University, and Wayne State is where I ended up to get my master's in public health. That led me into finding a job out here on the East Coast with the Alexandria Health Department in Virginia. And I was a community education specialist for several years. And my focus, as Lacara said, was comprehensive sexual education for young people, and really focused on teen pregnancy prevention practices. Fast forward, and I had my two kids. I had taken time off work, and I got into teaching. So I became a public school teacher, and a little bit of high school, not much, but mostly middle school. And I was a health teacher. It's not very often that you have just a straight up health teacher in the public school setting. Usually it's the PE teachers, and they also teach health, but I was the straight up health teacher. So that's a little bit of the background on me and my education and my experience out in the field. So what I want to sort of go over first is some terms that we're going to be using. There's just 3 of them throughout this presentation. The first one being health education. And health education helps adolescents acquire functional health knowledge and strengthens attitudes, beliefs, and practice skills needed to adopt and maintain healthy behaviors throughout their lives. Next up, we have the word inclusive. This is a long one, but I'm going to read it out loud anyway. So the term inclusive here is activities, curricula, language, and other practices in the educational environment that ensure every student's entitlement to, access to, and participation in learning is anticipated, acknowledged, and taken into account. So this includes all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, ability, socioeconomic status, gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, size, or religion. And as we know, homeschooling is part of that education setting. And so in simplest terms, homeschooling is to teach school subjects to one's children at home. And like I said before, may not always be your child. Sometimes it's a caregiver. It could be a family member. It could be a family friend doing the homeschooling. But either way, that's the term. And so why are we doing this? Why is inclusivity in homeschooling so important? Why does it matter? Well, representation is the main reason why it matters, because as a friend reminded me once before, it opens up doors and shows you windows. So it might be that you have a child who finds themselves represented in the books or media that they're given, but also that shows them into a life or a situation that they can't relate to, that isn't who they are. And so we want to expose our children to all of these different people and backgrounds, because it brings social awareness, which brings me to the next one, because the world is full of diverse people. And as we know, I think many of us who are homeschoolers, especially recently, we're told constantly, and I think a stereotype of homeschooling is that you're shutting your kids out from the world, when in reality, for many of us, especially now, it's really to expand our kids' world, to make it bigger. And so that's why exposing our kids to all of the different types of people in the world is so important. And so for this, when we're talking about comprehensive sex education, what we're really talking about is a holistic approach to sexual health. It is not just about anatomy and biology. It considers the whole child. It considers their emotional health. It considers their social health. So when we're talking about comprehensive sexual health, we want to look at it from a holistic approach. And so for those of us who really are curious about what the standards are, I have a feeling many homeschoolers here, or even if you are somebody here who educates young people, or you are a parent and your kid goes to the public school or a traditional school, and you just want to know sort of what is the standard for what should be covered, this is it. So the National Sex Education Standards will cover consent in healthy relationships, anatomy and physiology, puberty and adolescent sexual development, gender expression and sexual orientation identity, sexual health, and interpersonal violence. Now, I don't think I said before, I'm in the state of Maryland. And so when I was teaching, it was here in the state of Maryland. And when I was teaching, the inclusive language was starting to come into play, where we were changing the wording on how we were on the assignments, using they instead of he and she, how I would address the students in class. So that was starting to develop. Gender expression and sexual orientation, I know it's been updated. And so I know that recently that has also been included now in the state of Maryland. So because these are the national standards, that does not mean that every state covers these. So keep that in mind. But this is, if you are somebody who is wanting to know, what am I supposed to be teaching my kid about sex education, this is the standard. And so if you do want the detailed definitions of those, you can go to an organization called SECUS, which is Sexual Information and Education Council of the United States. And it's sex ed for social change. So I'm not sure if we can get that put in, a link for that. We didn't talk about that before, so don't worry about it, Lakara, if you can't. But in case anybody wants to know the details of those, that's where you can go. Okay, so let's move on. And we're going to talk about abstinence-only curriculum and the teen birth rates. I have a feeling you beautiful, smart people are going to know where I'm going with this, but I want to bring it to the attention. And I'm going to relate this to homeschooling after these couple of slides. So 29 states and the District of Columbia require sex education. 30 states require schools to emphasize the importance of abstinence when sex education or HIV/STI instruction is provided. 16 states provide abstinence-only sex education. and 6 states explicitly require instruction that discriminates against LGBTQIA plus people. There is a difference between stressing abstinence and covering abstinence. Stressing abstinence would mean that most likely they're not covering contraception, and covering abstinence would be you are covering it. So it is part of the contraception options. That's what it is here in the state of Maryland. So Lakara, if you could click on the education map. And I know this is kind of small. And I know that this map is from 2016. But the data that I just told you all is updated. It's from 2022. So the first one I want to show you, this is sex education must either stress or cover abstinence. Okay, so I just explained what stress versus cover means. And you'll notice that a lot of it's light blue, which means yes. Okay, so a lot of states stress or cover. Now, this doesn't differentiate in the states which one are stress and which one are cover. So that's why we're going to move up to the next map. And we're going to show you sex education must cover contraception. And so now what you notice is that all those dark blue states are the states that are not required to cover contraception. Okay. Now that shows a lot more than maybe what the data said before, where there's 16 states that's abstinence only. So some of these states, now it's only 16 states, okay? 16 states, which is a lot of states, cover abstinence only education. So let's go to now the next slide. And I want you to have a mental picture of that map. I apologize that I couldn't get it onto the presentation, but have a mental picture of that map, because here are the abstinence. Here is the latest data from the CDC for teen birth rates. And what you might notice is that if you were to overlap those maps, especially with the updated information from 2022 on the previous slide, the states that stress abstinence and do not cover contraception have some of the highest teen birth rates in the United States. Now, that's a pretty significant finding there. And so the reason I'm telling you all this is because if you are choosing to homeschool your child, you're now responsible for this information being passed along to your kid. You're now responsible for giving your kid access to this information. Okay? Because it's important. Knowledge is power. Study after study shows that providing information to young people about sexual health increases the chance that they're going to make healthy decisions. Okay. So, all right, let's move on from that now that we've seen that. So let's talk about what actually is available. Okay. In the homeschool world, what is available? There are some unit studies that cover anatomy, that cover puberty, that cover reproductive health. However, these unit studies are almost exclusively non-exclusive and abstinence-based. So, you know, there was a time, and I want to say it was back in January, I think is when I reached out to you all, where I just started to notice that there is a huge gap here. There is a very wide gap between what is offered in the traditional school setting and what is offered in the homeschool world. So if somebody's choosing to homeschool, and they're choosing to homeschool because they want to make the world bigger for their child or young person, because they want to give them more information, they want to be inclusive and provide all of this, all of the comprehensive sex ed information that they need, there really isn't anything out there. And so that's why we started to partner on this because we really needed to bridge this gap. And so what this webinar hopefully is going to give you are the resources that you need and the tools you need to provide this information and to learn along with your young person. And hopefully what you'll find at the end of this is that you also feel more confident. So, all right, let's move on from there. And Lacara told you about, she put the link up for this super cool little educator, note-taking sheet. So if you were able to print that out or you're using it digitally, this would be the time to grab it. Or if you're a journal person or just a notebook, grab that, because I have some questions that I want you to ask yourself. So we're going to reflect within a little bit, okay? So whether you're choosing to homeschool or you just want your learner to have a more holistic approach to sexual health, these questions below will help guide the relationship you're looking to have moving forward with your child or young person. So the things I want you to think about are, what do I feel comfortable talking to my young person about, my child about? What do I feel uncomfortable talking to my young person about or my child about? Because that might be the most important question. What are you feeling uncomfortable with? And we're going to talk about why you might feel uncomfortable next. And then also, how can I support my young person or child through this journey? How can you support them? So take some time to just think about that. Jot those questions down if you can. And I want to tell you that feeling uncomfortable with this topic is completely normal and natural. This has been my life's work and my hyperfixation. I was just telling Lacara this for 14 years now. And there are still things that I sit down and talk with my kids about, who are almost 7 and 9, that I still inside, when I say it out loud or they have a question, make me feel uncomfortable inside. And so let's sort of explore why that is. So let's move on. And we're going to start with when you should start, because you know what? Let me back up just a second. Hang on. Don't click that video yet. So I do get 3 questions a lot. Okay. The 3 questions that I get that are the most common are, when do I start talking about this topic with my kid? How do I talk about it? And what if they don't ask questions? Then what? So we're going to start with a short video through a maze about when you should start talking about this topic.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's start with the #1 question parents always ask me. When exactly do I start talking to my child about sexuality?
Great! I'm always worried I'll say too much too soon.
Well, believe it or not, everyone, you've already started. Even if you haven't yet had one conversation, even if your child doesn't even talk yet.
Huh?
How was that even possible?
We put a lot of emphasis on talking with our kids about sex. Maybe it's because it's the part we're uncomfortable with. But from the instant they're born, infants are constantly learning about the world around them through experience. For example, when they receive your loving care through gentle touches and soothing sounds, they're learning all about emotional and physical closeness and safety. And that will support healthy sexual development too. So, you've been teaching them important lessons from day one without even saying a word.
I never thought of it that way. Experiencing intimacy is way more important than hearing about where babies come from.
I never really got that kind of love from my parents, so I had to learn the hard way in my teens and 20s, and it took a long time before I had a clue on how to be in a couple.
I guess I was lucky because my parents didn't say squat about sex, but they did teach me how to love other people and myself too.
Another area where we teach constantly without talking is gender. Tell me, if I was somehow suddenly transported to your child's room and I took a look around, how long would it take for me to guess their biological sex.
I'm not sure you could tell.
Maybe about a minute.
Or a second. For my older boy, the smell would probably give it away.
Every family is unique, but we all grow up in a society that emphasizes the ways men and women are supposed to be different. Imagine if we focused on what we have in common instead.
Like pizza. Everyone likes pizza.
The main thing to remember is kids learn about sexuality and gender every day, mostly in ways we can't easily see or hear. But if you can learn to recognize what and how your kids are learning, you can make better decisions about which messages to encourage and which to correct. When you get home, take another look around your child's room and think about what they're learning about gender. Are the messages healthy, or could they limit in some way the choices they make in the future?
I'll give it a try. Sounds like my Sophie's learning more than I thought without me saying a word.
Yep. And next time, we'll discuss exactly what young children do want and need us to talk to them about, and when to.
And maybe go splitsies on a pie.
Okay, what I love about the Amaze website and all their videos is that they have such an awesome parent section where you can watch several videos just like that and all sorts of different questions. So you should go check that out. We are going to watch a couple more, but so from that video, really what we're talking about is that you are their first example of intimacy in relationships. Okay. But we also want to consider that there are outside influences, especially as they get older. So for instance, my oldest, no matter how much I talk about how color has no gender, okay? I mean, since birth, I've been telling him this. For some reason, he still associates boys in blue and girls in pink. So it doesn't matter. There is going to be some outside influence there, right? So also from that video, observe what and how they are learning and decide what to encourage and what you want to correct. So I want to step back for a second and talk about how these feelings of being uncomfortable with this topic, they come from somewhere, right? So how are we going to connect with our young person when we feel so uncomfortable about something? And so why is it so difficult? And there are a few reasons for that. One of the first reason being that there's no example to follow. And so this really shows up when we start thinking about how we were raised. Were we raised with trusting adults, parents, caregivers who talk to us about this topic? Were they uncomfortable talking about it? Did they never talk about it at all with us? Was it expected that we got all of our information from public school or traditional school? So really, if you don't have an example to follow, you're kind of in the dark. Another thing that could really influence it is past trauma, your own past trauma. It could make you feel really uncomfortable and really not want to talk about certain things, especially if it was a essay or, you know, things that really harmed you in the past. So past trauma could be a really large contributing factor. And then also talking about outside influence, there's this assumption sometimes that sex and parents don't mix, that you should not be talking to your parents about this topic, that you should feel uncomfortable talking to your parents about this topic. And so where does that influence come from? Who are they hearing that from? And if it's not from you, if you haven't taught them to be uncomfortable with you, then it's coming from an outside influence. So with that, what can you do? There's a few things you can do. You can educate yourself first. So if you're feeling uncomfortable with the topic, do some research, educate yourself. And uncomfortable can mean a few different things, but uncomfortable with just knowledge, like maybe you feel like you don't know much. So educate yourself first so that you feel prepared. Stay approachable. And that means, can your young person come to you with a question without feeling like you're uncomfortable? Okay. And this is why I keep coming back to those questions. I really want you to think about what it is that makes you uncomfortable or what you're comfortable with. Because if you're feeling uncomfortable, they're going to know it. And then finally, learn together. And I have a little side story with this because, like I said, I have been in this field for about 14 years now. I taught in the community setting. I taught in the school setting. And when I tell you homeschooling my kids and talking about this topic, I have learned more in the 3 years talking about this topic with my 2 kids than I ever have in the 14 years of my education, of being in the community and in the classroom. So that's the beauty of homeschooling. And I know that all of you homeschoolers know this because you live it, is that when you're choosing to homeschool, you really get to take the time. You really get to take the time to personalize literally everything. Whereas when I was in the classroom, my biggest classroom was 36 students. I don't even know how I did that. 36 students. And there is just not enough time to get to every student's question. Okay. And so now on the flip side of that, I'm home with my kids and we can talk for an hour straight about one question they have if we want to. And so that's what makes it so awesome. So then what do you do if you have a kid or a young person who really is just like, no, I don't want to talk about this. Maybe you haven't had these conversations since they were really young, and now you're wanting to start that. That's awesome. Go you, number one. So here are my few suggestions for that. Leave resources out. So whatever inclusive resources you find, you can just leave them out. Us homeschoolers call it strewing. So I know many of you know that term, and strewing really just means you're leaving activities or resources out for your kids to find. And if they happen upon it and they become interested and they look through it themselves, that's the goal. Sometimes it'll sit out for 2 minutes and they'll notice it right away. Sometimes it'll sit out for 2 days. Sometimes they'll never notice it, and that's okay. Try a different resource. And then you can always come back to it and ask them what they thought of it. Another suggestion is a parent-child journal. So being a neurodivergent household, and knowing a little bit about that, some young people, some adults don't do well with auditory processing, verbal processing. And so really what might work better is they want to write stuff down. And that's okay. I mean, I kept so many journals as a young kid, like stacks of them, where I would just write in them every single day. And so if you have a kid who is who processes information through writing, use a parent-child journal. And that can be as simple as going and getting the cheapest notebook you can find, setting it out, writing a question in it, and then letting them respond. Giving it a day, giving it a couple days. And then if they have a question, they can put it in there. And so that way it sort of takes away this pressure and this face-to-face interaction that might make them feel nervous, or you nervous. And then my last suggestion is, if all else fails, which it's not a fail, outsource. Like you don't have to consider yourself a failure if it's just not working and there's no connection there. And you feel like it's just not working for either of you. The main goal here is to just get them the information, no matter how you have to do it. So outsourcing might look like finding another trusted adult who you both trust. So who your young person trusts, who you trust, to give this information, or to be somebody who your child can go to, that they will ask questions to. That might look like taking online classes or classes at the local college if you have a high schooler. So don't feel like a failure if you need to outsource this subject. Us homeschoolers know outsourcing is an option for literally every single subject in school for homeschooling. Count this as one of them as well if you need to do that. All right, so we're going to get to the second most asked question that I get, and that is, so how do I talk to my kids about sex? And we're going to get to that.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming. I know it's tough for parents to get out sometimes.
No matter, nothing gets in my way when it comes to helping my kids.
To be honest, I didn't exactly choose to be here. I mean, what does sex have to do with our 3-year-old? I didn't learn about this stuff until middle school, and that was fine with my parents.
A lot of us, including me, had that kind of experience as kids. What do the rest of you think?
My parents were like Brad's, but I think they might have been wrong. I can already see that our 2-year-old is curious about her body. It's pretty funny.
And isn't it better they learn from us rather than other kids who only think they know what they're talking about because their parents don't talk to them either? My 9-year-old's friend actually told her just last week that girls eat their tampons. She saw it on YouTube. Okay, but still, how do you know the right thing to say? If you get it wrong or if it's too much too soon, couldn't that be harmful?
For many generations, adults thought that shielding kids from learning about sexuality was the safe thing to do. The truth is, better educated kids are way more likely to make better decisions as they grow up about everything, including sexuality. But with sexuality, there's still a double standard that says knowledge could be harmful.
I know you're right, but I'm so embarrassed by the words I'd have to say.
And isn't it better for moms to talk to daughters and dads to talk to boys?
Children, especially young children, look to grown-ups for information simply because we're trusted adults, regardless of characteristics like gender. And one of the best things we can do is give the message that everybody can talk and learn from each other about this subject.
I get it, but I still don't know if I can say the word penis in front of my kid.
Embarrassment is one of those catchy feelings, and most of us caught embarrassment about sexual things from people around us when we were very young. So we never get to find out that these words are just words, and that it's really healthy and okay to say them out loud.
You're right. Why should I be embarrassed to say testicles or erections?
Nipples?
Masturbation, vulva, clitoris, ejaculation, scrotum.
Vagina.
Penis!
Good job, everyone. And with a little practice, like try repeating these words to yourself in front of a mirror this week. I think you'll be ready.
Oh, I love that video so much. There are so many good things about that one video. So I'm gonna talk about a few of them. You better believe that when I was a middle school teacher, I had all of my students shout out penis and vagina just to get it out of the way. So that was the kind of teacher I was. Anyway, the best thing about that video that you can take away from that is that better educated kids make better decisions. And that's a big takeaway here. Access to information does not make kids make poor decisions. They have more knowledge, they have more information. The more you know, the more you do better, you can make the better decisions. You get it. Also, I think we all know not every family has a mom and a dad. All families are different, so gender should not matter. And I want to share, I'm going to share a couple stories. But the first one I'm going to share is I'm going to go back to my teacher days. And I want to tell you that I am a firm believer in everybody learning about every aspect of puberty. It does not matter if you are a boy, you do not only learn about what boys go through in puberty. You also need to learn about what girls go through in puberty. That is a big thing in our house. And so I always beg people, I'm like, please, 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 please teach your boys about the menstrual cycle. When I was a teacher, a middle school teacher, I had 6th graders come into my class who had never even heard of the menstrual cycle, did not know anything about it. So they weren't even aware of the process of it, what happens. And I had 2 of my male students faint in class, just talking about periods. So please, I ask everybody to please teach your boys about the menstrual cycle. It's very important. And so gender doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A mother does not have to only teach the daughter. It can be a dad. It really doesn't matter. One of my favorite books that was gifted to me a little while ago is called the P Word book, all about the P word, all about the penis. And so our entire family sat on the couch. I asked my husband if I could tell this story. He was also raised with not a lot of information. He got all of his information about sexual health through our public school, which was very limited. It was the 90s. Most of you get that. And so we're all sitting on the couch and I'm reading this book out loud to my kids and they're giggling and laughing, and which is perfectly fine. And that's okay. That's normal. And afterwards, Chris says to me, I am so glad that you are good with this stuff because I'm not. And I felt so uncomfortable the whole time. But you know what? I didn't know it, because if you let your kids see that you're uncomfortable with the topic, they will then be uncomfortable with the topic. So you really have to hold that feeling in. Okay. It's okay to talk about how maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but like when you're saying the words, when you're talking about the topic, try to hold that in, because the more you show that you're uncomfortable, the more they're going to feel uncomfortable. So just keep that in mind. And I love my husband so much for being who he is, because I thought that was just amazing. Okay. So let's move on to the next one, which is another video. And this is the last thing that I always get asked is, what if they don't ask? Then what do we do? So let's watch this video and then talk about it.
Welcome back, everyone. So, any more thoughts about the questions and answers we talked about last time?
Yes, I am glad to have answers, but what if they're not asking the questions?
Well, then, I think you'll want to start the conversation yourself. They're going to have friends that are asking, and you want to make sure your kids are getting information this important from you, not through the grapevine.
But how do you start an awkward conversation like that out of the blue?
Well, let's think of a similar situation that doesn't have anything to do with sexuality. Name something else that's important to you that you really want your kids to know about.
My religion,
Family.
The environment.
love, and money.
Robots from 1960 science fiction movies.
Okay, well, how do you bring up those topics? You just weave them into everyday life, right? Marcus, did you know this candy bar you love costs money? How much do you think it costs? Hey, Marcus, did I ever tell you your great-grandmother was an incredible cook? Let's make her special chicken soup when we get home. Marcus, do you see that woman in the checkout line? She has a baby growing inside her. Have you ever wondered how babies grow? It's true. We can easily weave origin conversations into everyday life, just like other important topics. Or suppose you've never talked about origins and one day you decide to. How might you casually bring up the subject?
You could say, you know, there's something we never talked about before. I think this is a good time.
That's great. And what if you gave some information a while ago, but your child has never brought it up again?
Oh, you could say, remember when we were talking about where babies grow before they're born? Did you ever wonder how they come out?
Yes, remember when is a great phrase to start out with.
But what if you didn't quite tell the truth the time before?
No problem. Just acknowledge it. Can someone try that out?
Remember when I told you babies come from outer space? Well, that wasn't exactly correct.
Remember when you asked how two dads could have a baby and I just changed the subject? Well, I couldn't think of how to answer the question, but I'm ready now.
Excellent, Brad and Terry. Parents always have the do-over option. I'm so proud of all of you. You've given yourself some really great common sense ways to start. Use everyday experiences, announce let's talk about something new, start out with remember when, and ask for a do-over. And remember, everyone, it's never too early to start talking about the things that are most important.
Hey, I've been talking to my kids about robots since before they were born.
Okay. Another great video. And all of you homeschoolers, the bread and butter of homeschooling is weaving subjects into everyday life, especially if you're an unschooler. But homeschooling in general is all about weaving subjects in. And you can do that with sex education. And I'm going to give you an example. The other day, my kids and I were watching a movie. We were watching the second movie of a franchise. And the actors from the first movie, from the switch from the first movie to the second movie, they automatically immediately noticed that the main character's voice was deeper. And I said, why do you think that is? And they said, I'm not sure. And I said, well, he probably went through puberty, or he's going through puberty. And they said, oh yeah. Now my kids know about puberty. I bring it up as often as I can to make it as normal as I possibly can. And so that's a great example of how you can just interweave sex education into everyday life. So a few things from that. At the end there, what they talked about is announcing, let's talk about something new, remember when, and ask for a do-over. So if it's something that you tried, that you avoided before because you didn't know how to answer it, that's okay. You can revisit it at any time. So I love that video too. Again, everybody should go look at that whole parent section on amaze.org. Okay, so where do I go from here? Number one thing, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. We've established that. My husband was uncomfortable with that book being read out loud. He was uncomfortable, but my kids didn't see that. And so guess what? Now my kids see that their dad isn't uncomfortable with this topic either. And so maybe someday they'll come to him with a question. He may not be able to answer it, and he may say, hey, let's go ask your mom. But they'll still come to him. And that's kind of the goal there, is that you want to be approachable, right? Even if you're uncomfortable. Just know that you will mess up, and that's okay. I've been doing this a long time, and I still don't answer things correctly 100% of the time. That's okay. Use diverse and inclusive resources. And that's part of what we're doing here today. The most obvious choice here is amaze.org, because that's what they do. That's what they do. We have now created a free homeschool toolkit, and it will be available soon. And I am so excited to see it. I believe if I remember correctly, Lakara, it's the elementary age, so up to the age of 11, I believe, is what's being released. And then in the future, middle and high will also be released. And so the last thing here is I spent hours and hours and hours curating a resource page for you all. And I am so proud of it. And I am so happy. I was in my hyperfixation bubble, and I had so much fun researching and finding all these books and looking for all of this media that I could pass along to you. So really what I've created here is a resource list of different types of media, and then I've broken them down into categories. So first I have the Instagram social media accounts. Next up, I have websites that are credible, reliable, valid, and some of these are very interactive websites. Some of them are geared towards teens to go explore on their own. You could do it together. Great websites there. Then I go into picture books, which obviously would be for like the elementary age. Moving down to the next page, I get into still elementary age, but I categorized it out into family, gender, and sex education. So that would be at the elementary age. Consent and body safety is also at the those recommendations are at the elementary age, which if you are struggling to figure out how to talk about consent to your elementary age child, young person, please go look at these resources. They're wonderful. And consent does not just have to be about sex. Consent is not just about sex. Our kids learn what consent is every day in everyday life. And so that's another one of those topics that you can interweave throughout your day of consent. But please go look at those. Then we get into upper elementary, 4th, 5th grade, early middle. And so here are all the puberty recommendations that I have. Then we get into middle and high school. And that is really when we start getting into relationships, healthy relationships, more talk about gender and sex. And then finally, the last category that I put together was books for you all. Books for parents or caregivers, or the trusted adult with the young person. And I hope that those are helpful for you all. So I put a lot of time and effort into this list, and I hope that you all find it helpful. So what's the bottom line here? Knowledge equals power equals healthy decision making. We know that. We know that from the research. We know that access to all this information gives young people the tools that they need to make healthier decisions as they get older. It is never too late to start. If you have a teenager, it is never too late to start. Okay. So hopefully some of these suggestions helped you in that area if you're struggling to make that connection with your young person. And just know that you can do this. You will mess up. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. The bottom line here is you can do this, and you can provide this information to your child, to your young person. And that is really the bottom line. They need this information to be the best version of themselves when it comes to holistic, comprehensive sex education. So I want to revisit this. I asked you all some questions in the beginning, but now I'm going to add a few more. The original ones are there, but the ones I added are about you all. So how can I support myself in this journey? How am I feeling now? Maybe you're feeling excited, nervous, uncomfortable, more comfortable, anxious. All the feelings are valid and normal. I think you all know that. So how are you feeling now? And then what are my next steps? Where are you going to go from here? How are you going to engage your young person in these conversations? How are you going to educate yourself? How are you going to look within and really dig deep and see why it is that you feel uncomfortable with talking about certain topics when it comes to sex education? So hopefully throughout this presentation, you have thought about those things. And I really hope that you feel more comfortable on this topic. And if you don't, that's okay. That is okay. So I do want to welcome questions. I was given a list of questions that I was given ahead of time that I have some answers to. And I think we have some extra time. So I'm gonna go through those questions first. And I think what we decided is if there's extra time at the end, then we'll answer any additional questions that are out there. So how to manage multiple kids at different ages for sex ed. I'm going to try to, organization me kicked in, and I actually responded to all of these. So I'm going to read right through it. So I apologize for looking down. I'm going to try not to go off track because I'm being mindful of our time, but it depends on the age gap. My kids are 7 and 9, and my oldest is not, they're about the same maturity level. And so it really depends on the age gap. Gender shouldn't matter. We've already discussed that. All kids need to know about everything. Establish boundaries. So that might mean if you have a large age gap, older kids shouldn't be telling younger kids information that they aren't developmentally ready for. You always want to make sure it's a safe and open learning space. And laughter is okay. It's totally normal. If you're separating the kids, set time aside for each one. One-on-one with the younger kids, independent reading or video watching for the older kids, and then you can connect about the topic together afterwards. So I hope that answered that question. The next question that someone said was, how can we advocate for BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, and inclusive homeschooling sex ed when we are in really white spaces? So my answer to this is continue to use diverse resources and media that represent these communities, preferably written by people of those communities. We want to listen to their stories, and we want to listen to their experiences and believe them. And so this is why Amaze is like my number one choice, because that is what they're all about. They have a whole host of resources that are diverse and all sorts of different people and representation. And I just love it so much. So yes, using Amaze is my go-to. What recommendations would you offer to discuss sexual pleasure to kiddos who are ages 5 and 6 or 5 and up? This homeschool toolkit that's going to be rolled out through Amaze will have lessons that address that. And then also the book called Vaginas and Periods 101. It's a pop-up book. They have a penis one coming out soon too. It's on my resource list that also addresses that. Would the content be tailored to meet individual family values? Yes, absolutely. It's up to you how you want to use it. The toolkit is meant to be medically and socially accurate and includes inclusive language. But it's up to you how you would like to use them to meet your own family values and what that looks like for you. Would love good resources for neurodivergent LGBTQ plus teens who want to explore sex ed on their own. My resource page is full of diverse and inclusive recommendations in various forms of media. Some books are chapter books, some are graphic novel style. There are also engaging, credible, valid websites to explore. Having an array of choices for neurodivergent people is key. So hopefully they can find something that they can look through on their own and that you can read through as well. Now, there was a question about students with disabilities. That is not my expertise, but I know that they have lessons, the 3 R's lessons, and I'm not sure, Lakara, if you're going to be putting up a link to that. I can't remember what we talked about, but it's students with disabilities, a teacher supplement. So it's not for the homeschool setting. They're not altered lesson plans like the homeschool toolkit's going to be. It would be for a classroom setting. So I hope that answers that question. There were a couple of questions about homeschooling and how it's sort of overseen. I don't think that this webinar, I could talk a lot about that, but in a nutshell, I'm going to answer this very quickly. Is there an organization or entity that holds parents accountable to teach comprehensive sex education? Each state here in the US has their own laws regarding homeschooling. In general, it's up to the school district in which a child resides to oversee the home education of that student. Unfortunately, even with a state that requires homeschool oversight from the district, that doesn't always include health or sex education. That's just the reality of it. Are the homeschool standards different than those in a traditional? Because the laws vary state by state. This means that some states require very little evidence of home education while others require extensive evidence. So it could be as simple as signing a piece of paper and then the district never checks in on that family ever again. Or it could be as detailed as a monthly home visit or portfolio reviews where you have to provide examples in each subject. Tracking hours spent on instruction, things like that. Another option that's out there that many people go with is an umbrella organization. And then finally, what are the top concerns, reservations homeschooling parents worry about as far as pro-sex educators teaching their kids. I wasn't sure how to take this question, and I might have Lakara sort of hop in and answer this, but one of the reasons maybe why parents are hesitant to allow their child to be a part of the comprehensive sex education class or the family life portion of it is that there's a barrier in communication there, and they might not understand what exactly is being taught in the classroom. So that's the most basic answer I can get, and I hope that that answers that question.
No, that was beautiful. Thanks, Andrea. And you answered that question just like what we talked about, but that is definitely a concern that some parents do have. And that's why, as for those who are in the public education, private education environment, making sure that you are involved and you have those conversations with either that's the principal, the school district, and being able to look at the curriculum themselves. So again, that's very much public school and private school specific and not homeschool specific. So I don't want to labor too much on that. But once again, show Andrea some love in the chat. This has been absolutely phenomenal. And I learned so much from Andrea every time that we connect and we talk. I do want to go ahead and highlight a couple things before we do close, because I want to be respectful of folks' time. The first thing is, if you would like to provide feedback or if you would like a certificate of participation in tonight's webinar, I posted the link to our evaluation form in the chat. Once you fill out the evaluation, you will automatically receive a certificate of participation for joining us here this evening. The next thing is, Andrea spoke really highly about that wonderful resource page that is fantastic. And so that resource page will be available within the next 48 hours. So I would say no later than Friday, I will work with my team and colleagues to make sure that we can get it out on the website. If it's not out on the website, please know that the email address that you provided, whether you're joining us live or you are listening to the recording, you will receive all the information that we talked about tonight. Some of my team members even put some of the links, and then you all shared some links with us in the chat about some resources. So please know that we did note down those resources and those video links, and we will also be sending that to you in a follow-up email as well. So we hope that you all gained so much knowledge and information from Andrea tonight, and we hope that you continue to utilize Amaze and be on the lookout for that toolkit that will be released this Friday. So.
And if I didn't make it to questions, because we're out of time.
Yes, but let's talk about that. So what I was thinking is, what we can do is, I would say between now and Friday, or even now and Monday, I captured all of the questions from the Q&A and from the chat. So if we were not able to answer your question, we can work on an FAQ sheet. And that way you will have Andrea's response to your question. And then also, Andrea, if you want to put your email address in the chat box for folks to reach out to you, I'll also include that in a follow-up email. That way we can all stay connected to all of this marvelous information as well.
Right. There's my email. And obviously you can all find me on Instagram. And feel free to DM me a question too. I do respond. I haven't lately, but I do respond to DMs, but I've been so busy prepping for this that I haven't really
taken your time.
I know. It's okay. It's all good time taken.
Yeah.
But this has been wonderful. Thank you all so much for the support and for coming on here. I saw so many familiar names in the chat box. And I'm just so thankful that we were able to connect and do this. I'm so appreciative.
Absolutely, as we are to you. So thank you again. You will be seeing more resources regarding homeschooling education from us here at Amaze, of course, with the direction and support of Andrea. So please stay tuned to our newsletter and then all of our communication. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. Bye for now.